Hello, lovely peoples. Welcome back to my channel. Today we're talking about another interesting historical figure, except we're fast forwarding all the way to the 1920s out of Nuremberg, Germany. Little hint from my last video. And we're talking about a famous, one of the most renowned jazz players from the 1920s era. Her name is Bessie Smith, otherwise known as the Empress of the Blues. If you're new to my channel, welcome back. What we do around here is we go through history and we look at some interesting people, figureheads, and eventually I'm going to start talking about also cases throughout history, like as in, you know, law cases. Without further ado, let's get into the video. Bessie Smith, otherwise known as the Empress of the Blues, became one of the most commercially successful black entertainers of the 1920s. She toured through the segregated South, navigating racial violence and even reportedly confronted members of the Ku Klux Klan when they attempted to intimidate her before a show. Her success laid the groundwork for artists like Billie Holiday, Nina Simone, and later Aretha Franklin, leaving her mark on the world for decades to come. Bessie Smith was born in 1894 in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Hope I said that right. I will put the spelling on screen. By 1923, at just 29 years old, she released her first major recording with Columbia Records, Downhearted Blues. And within its first year, the record reportedly sold close to 800,000 copies, an extraordinary number for the time. By her early 30s, she was the highest paid black entertainer in the United States. She was touring constantly, sometimes earning thousands of dollars a week. And keep in mind, this is the 1920s. She traveled in her own custom railroad car with a full band and production crew, something that few performers, black or white, could claim at the time. And I would just like to say again, this was all happening during Jim Crow segregation, not to deviate away from her success, but just to emphasize how impactful it was overall. Now that we've done a little overview as to who Bessie Smith was, we're going to get into her early childhood and adulthood. So, Bessie Smith was born into poverty. Her father died when she was young, and her mother died not long after that. By the time she was a child, she was essentially being raised by her siblings. She didn't grow up thinking, I'm going to be famous. She sang on street corners for money. And for black families in the South at the time, options were quite limited to domestic work, manual labor, agricultural work, and entertainment. Especially traveling entertainment was one of the few ways out of any one of those other type of fields. As a teenager, she joined traveling vaudeville shows. Hope I'm saying that correct. Basically, touring tent productions that moved from town to town, performing music, comedy, and stage acts. That's where she met May Rainey. May Rainey already knew what she was doing. She understood crowd psychology. She was pretty well known at the time, even still today. She knew when to slow down and when to push her audience, and also when to let silence sit. Bessie learned from her and absorbed all of which Miss Rainey had to offer. Bessie learned how to sing loud enough to reach the back of a tent, how to move with intention, and how to hold eye contact without flinching. By the time she left those shows, she wasn't just talented, she had a commanding and confident presence. In 1923, Bessie signed with Columbia Records. Her first major hit, Downhearted Blues, sold massively, reportedly hundreds of thousands of copies within its first year. This was huge, as this was during the era of what record companies called race records, that meant music marketed specifically to black audiences. The industry was unfortunately segregated, even in how it categorized sound. Offstage, as a young adult, Bessie was an outspoken and brazen young woman. She drank, she fought back when she was disrespected. She was known to physically confront people if and when necessary. She married a man named Jack Key and unfortunately had a very messy relationship with him. There were affairs on both sides as well as fights. Bessie Smith was also known to be involved with women. That wasn't marketed publicly, but it was known in her circles that Bessie Smith was bisexual, interested in both men and women. In her songs, women leave men, women drink, women get angry. Women survive heartbreak and keep going. She wasn't performing fragility, she was performing the reality of womanhood. Some of Bessie Smith's most famous songs outside of the downhearted blues were St. Louis Blues, Nobody Knows You When You're Down and Out, Backwater Blues, Careless Love Blues, and Tain't Nobody's Business If I Do. Some lyrics from her songs include I'm a young woman and ain't done running around. This was from Young Woman's Blues. I woke up this morning with an awful aching head. This was from Empty Bed Blues. And perhaps my most favorite, no, I'm kidding. But one of the lyrics was from A Good Man is Hard to Find, and the lyric is A Good Man is Hard to Find. A lot of Bessie Smith's lyrics also had to do with alcoholism, pretty notably. She did struggle with alcoholism, and this is pretty apparent in her lyrics like, Me and my gin, we're gonna take a little trip, me and my gin, and we don't need no friends. This is from Me and my gin. The Gin House Blues, stay out all night long, sitting in the gin house. When I feel high, I get me a buggy ride, take me for a buggy ride. A lot of her lyrics sound playful at first, but then the songs slowly start to unfold into themes of isolation, alcoholism, heartbreak. Notably, in Me and My Gin, she sings about how gin was her only steady companion. Also, the lyric, I woke up this morning with an awful aching head. It goes on to talk about, not talk, but I guess kind of insinuate feelings of loneliness, that feeling you get after a hangover where it's just regret. And what makes this song especially powerful was that she wasn't preaching about addiction. She wasn't necessarily talking about it, but she was kind of documenting how she felt, that sometimes the only thing that stayed in her hand was a bottle. And in the 1920s, for a woman to sing openly about drinking, desire, and self destruction was quite radical. Her songs, once again, didn't romanticize alcohol, or she wasn't necessarily preaching about addiction, but she was showing it as a coping mechanism, which was messy and human and real. Her honesty is what makes her music still so prevalent to this day. Many of us don't listen to the blues music anymore, but she has influenced generations of musicians beyond her direct influence on the aforementioned artists. At the top of her game in the mid 1920s, Bessie Smith was the most well known artist in America for blues. She wasn't just a singer, she ran productions as well. She employed musicians and dancers. She headlined major theaters. And remember, this was all happening under Jim Crow. So, where there was still segregated trains, hotels, and venues, she was powerful, but still had to navigate racial barriers constantly while touring. There are stories of her confronting white venue owners when they tried to underpay her, yet she knew her value and knew how to stand up for herself. All right, so that's kind of an overview of her life. Now we're going to get into what happened when the Great Depression hit. Because unfortunately, Mrs. Smith lived through the Great Depression. As a result of that, record sales dropped across the board. People didn't have money for entertainment, so touring became harder. In 1931, Columbia Records drops her, not because she suddenly lost talent, but because the market had changed. The label had to adjust, they cut artists, and unfortunately, Bessie Smith was one of them. Although she was dropped from Columbia Records, she kept performing. She tried adapting, and in 1933, she recorded again with producer John Hammond. But the sound of popular music was changing, swing was coming in, big bands were rising, and the era of classical blues was fading. Now, before we get to the end of her life, because unfortunately Mrs. Smith lived kind of a short life, there is a story worth recognizing from her touring years that captures who she was. At one outdoor performance in the South, members of the Ku Klux Klan reportedly attempted to interfere with the show, either by threatening the tent or trying to intimidate the performers. According to first-hand accounts from people in her troupe, Bessie didn't hide backstage. She walked out and confronted them directly. She told them to leave, and they did. During the confrontation, Miss Smith famously said, "I'll get the whole damn tent out here if I have to," forcing them to flee. And in the aftermath, after chasing the Klansmen away, Smith returned to her tent and continued the performance. Now, like many touring stories from that era, details vary depending on the source, but what matters is that this story survived because it aligns with everything else we know about her. She was not easily intimidated. She toured through the Jim Crow South for years, and that required more than just talent, it required bravery. It wasn't until 1970 that her grave received a headstone funded by Janis Joplin. Her phrasing, her emotional control, and her power helped to shape modern American vocal music to this day. And her recognition, like many artists, has expanded after her death. What makes Bessie Smith's life so interesting is that she wasn't just talented, it's that she built power inside a structure that was not built at all to protect her. As a figurehead of the Harlem Renaissance, her legacy remains as she is considered a legendary artist with the likes of Louis Armstrong and Duke Ellington. She commanded stages, showing that success and vulnerability can coexist amongst many obstacles, whether that be environmental, personal, or both. And that tension between power and limitation is what makes her story still relevant to this day, alongside her musical talent. If you would like to listen to her music, there are recordings on YouTube that I will leave in the description as well as Spotify. Information about Miss Smith is also present in the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C., which details her life, career, and influence on music. If you made it this far into the video, thank you so much for watching. I very much appreciate it because I am obviously a very new channel and I am so excited to continue making videos. I have a ton of ideas. If you guys have any suggestions for what you might want me to research and talk about, please leave them in the comments. I'm open to all suggestions because history is never ending. I'm specifically interested in kind of like the justice and law aspect, but I mean, obviously, history as a whole is very interesting. I wanted to do a video about Bessie Smith because I see the likes of Duke Ellington, May Rainey being talked about, but I don't really see a lot about Mrs. Smith. And I think her life is so interesting because she was just such a character. She had such a strong and interesting personality in life. So even if it's not related to far back history or the law, definitely feel free to leave any and all suggestions. Thank you for watching. Hopefully, Editor Me puts up nice visuals to watch alongside it. And I hope you have an amazing rest of your day.